this issue is so important, right? It's so big, it's so huge. There's no issue more important. That's why I think it's, and I personally have kind of done this. It's really critical to do nonviolent civil disobedience, to go on hunger strikes. I mean, I've done those things, and I'll keep doing them as necessary. But I also think the issue is so important that we do need to reach out to any major corporations that are willing to support, something that really moves us forward. So I kind of agree with the general, thrust of what both of you have said and that approach. The question is how you do it, right? How you kind of walk that fine line. Talking to somebody who's an independent. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. There's a lot of us in the United States who are independents, right? And I'm an independent on the left. So I don't want to go any deeper into that, but the whole question of how you kind of do this dance, how you kind of mobilize the left, build up a much stronger movement that pushes the agenda, that gets out there, that makes this an issue that has to be addressed, and how you do that, and how you relate to major corporations is something that needs kind of, I think, more discussion. I would need it. But just the question that I have, though, is a much more specific one. Since the election, I saw in one case an article, and in another case I talked to somebody on Capitol Hill who, and between the article and the conversation, Sensenbrenner, James Sensenbrenner, right, who's been a Republican leader for, 20, 30 years, a long time. He was at an event, mainly Republicans. Susan Collins was there, senator from Maine, who's a co-sponsor of the CLEAR Act, cap and dividend bill. Sensenbrenner publicly talked positively about Collins and about the CLEAR Act, which was very surprising to me. Joe Barton, who's the same guy who apologized to BP because, Obama set up this fund to force BP to pay money to people who were hurt because of the blowout disaster. Joe Barton was quoted as saying something to the effect that when it comes to climate legislation, that he's open to the possibility of something that is like a market-based approach rather than the government kind of deciding it. So kind of my question is, what do you, particularly you, Congressman Inglis, Sensenbrenner, Barton, others, what do you think in terms of any possibilities that they might move kind of towards, some kind of a price on carbon and a dividend approach?
I think that there is a real possibility of that. I think we should commit ourselves to getting that done. I mean, we as people that are concerned about this issue, trying to convince those decision makers to pursue it. The way to do that is to get to them in their language. That means things like free enterprise and making it so free enterprise, what I was saying in the other room. You notice, though, in the other room, there were a fair number of people that didn't buy that kind of approach. But they really wouldn't buy any presentation from Joe Barton or Jim Sensenbrenner, and Jim Sensenbrenner and Joe Barton wouldn't get any support out of that room. And so therefore, until you get to a place where you can do this cross-cultural kind of discussion, I mean, you can have an opportunity to actually evangelize, then you're not getting anywhere, because you can wump up all the people on the left. Well, we've seen how far we've gotten so far, which is we haven't gotten there yet. By the way, the left tried to use the market mechanism of cap and trade, and I mean, apologies to them. It sort of was a conservative sort of notion in a way, but then it got all messed up, and so that's why I think our cleaner approach with the revenue-neutral carbon tax is such a better way. I would say this. I think that it's very important, if you're going to try to get to Joe Barton or to Jim Sensenbrenner, you have to come to them with 100% revenue neutrality. This is where I'm sort of a purist. All of us got a pure point, right? And so I think the only way to get to a real conservative, and those are real conservatives, Joe and Jim, is to say to them, the government is not going to grow as a result of this. We're not going to take any additional money out of the till. We are just shifting the tax onto something else. The other thing, just briefly, with all due respect to people that pursue civil disobedience, I me just tell you there are a couple of examples of where it's worked great, like the civil rights movement. And I didn't realize that Bob Filner was a freedom rider, but that is very impressive. If you ever read David Halberstam's book, The Children, it is really amazing that I didn't know Bob Filner had done that. So it worked there, and it had to happen. It hasn't worked in some other places. The abortion protest involving closing of clinics and things like that that backfired on the pro-life movement, I believe. Code Pink was the worst thing that ever happened to the anti-war movement. If you know anything about the Code Pink people, they most of them needed their medicine and they were not taking it. And it was obvious from the gatherings in Washington that they were off of the medicine. And it was really not good for Republican. Nobody was affected by those Code Pink people. Not the Democrats, certainly not the Republicans. So it's what Bill McKibben was saying. Like, if you pursue it, make sure to carefully think how you're pursuing it. It's like a lady that climbed up on top of a coal-fired machine that was moving through our district. She got in the paper, but I don't think she got anywhere. You got to be careful about how you present that, especially if you're going to try to get through to these Republicans, right? I mean, they're dismissing her on top of that coal-fired machine just like they're dismissing the Code Pink people. So figure out a way to get a relationship going with a Republican. You don't have to whisper like at Nan Cohen's at Duke, but have a relationship with them and then speak their language and try to persuade them. This is conservatism. Leave aside the populism. Bob Filner kept using that word positively. I'm using it sort of negatively. It's a populace that runs in front of fearful people right now without turning around to say to them, why are you so afraid? But rather, the worst of them actually gin up their fear and cause them to run even faster to the cliff, rather than say, wait a minute, let's think about it. Nothing to fear but fear itself, to quote a Democrat. Anyway, so.
You had a question?
Yeah.
Do you need this?
No, believe me, I've got a loud voice. I've litigated for many years, so I can be loud. I'm Marcia Cleveland, and I work for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, so I'm a full-time lobbyist on this stuff, and I think a lot about how to talk to Republicans. Part of the reason is my entire family are Republicans, so getting through Thanksgiving dinner requires this. I wish I couldn't pass this year. I just couldn't face it this year. But anyway.
Confession is good for the soul here.
Yeah. I thought I'd tell you about my permanent residence is on an island 15 miles off the coast of Maine. And last year we voted 384 to 5 to build 3 windmills, 3 wind turbines. And the motivation behind it was the small businesses on the island were facing wild swings of their electric rates, because if you're in the Northeast, you have your electric rates are very oil dependent. And so, mostly for their sake and because of that reason, we voted for them and we built them. And guess what? They have certainly evened out our electric rates, and they're generating more electricity than we predicted. So we're meeting more than our needs, so we're selling more back to the grid than we thought, and our rates have come down. Okay? Now, no one anywhere in that debate mentioned climate change, carbon footprint, nothing. All we talked about was what was happening through electric rates and why our businesses that we're so dependent on. If you live 15 miles from Rockland, you want to have a grocery store on the island that's still in business, and you don't want to see them go belly up. And I keep thinking about that because somewhere in there is a better way to message. Somewhere in that story, there's a better way to message what we really want. I mean, I have to say I cringe at the title of this conference and the whole concept of stating our goal as putting a price on carbon. Our goal is not to put a price on carbon. Our goal is to do something effective about climate change. Putting a price on carbon is only one possible way of doing that. But when you say that, and people like the lobstermen in my hometown, or the clients I used to have who worked at the shipyard and had a high school diploma, You say put a price on carbon, the only thing they think is the price at the pump is going up and my heating oil is going up and I'm already on the tight budget. What's the matter with you? And I don't think you don't get the chance to say anything after their ears have shut. So why is it, why can't we start telling people what the good news is about shifting to a low carbon economy? I mean, we managed to sell 3 wind turbines and a carbon zero electric system for my island because it was good for small business. Why aren't we looking for this? Why can't we find more of those?
I wonder to what extent we might be able to build on the opposite side that we always ignore, the fact that we're cutting job taxes or issuing a dividend check. That, you know, this is a revenue neutral approach, a carbon tax shift or the dividend approach. So let's begin to sell that part of the equation. You had
one more comment. The New York Times showed up and wrote a story about the one family out of 1,300 people that complained about the noise, and that's the only story they wrote. They did not write a story about this community coming together.
Yeah.
So you want feedback, not just questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so several years ago, managed a small foundation, and I met with a few conservative groups, and I found there was support, limited support, for investigating the idea of a carbon tax. AEI, for example, came out with a position paper. Bill, you're probably familiar with it. It was actually quite positive on a carbon tax as opposed to cap and trade. And that was done in an atmosphere when the view was that climate change was something that we likely will have to deal with in the medium-term future. But that perception is gone now because of the last election. So any move toward a carbon tax seems to have melted away, and economists who tend to be conservative think tanks seem to be dropping a carbon tax like a hot potato that will lead to an attack by the Tea Party. So what is motivating conservatives? It's what motivated the lady in the front here. It's wanting effectively an economical source of energy that will be profitable, and recognizing the national security implications of dependence on fossil fuels, especially petroleum. There is a move to natural gas, thinking that will save us for the next 20 plus years. A big move toward that. But there's a pushback because of the problems, the externalities that might contaminate my water table. So just like the windmills on the road, unfortunately, most of America won't benefit from windmills or solar panels at a scale that will address climate change. It's a marginal improvement, but not sufficient. And the pushback against running transmission lines from the Southwest is huge, or from the middle of America is going to be huge, even among environmental groups, because it will impact numerous it'll impact parks, preserves, where they live, and the not in my backyard response will certainly trump the need for a national solution. So what is the solution? If you talk to conservatives, I've found, and then especially going to Heritage Foundation, it is nuclear power. The pushback from most environmentalists is, well, we fought that battle and we're opposed to it because of nuclear waste, because of the problems of proliferation, because of the problems of plant safety. But they have failed to look at improvements in technology since we had a failure at 3 Mile Island or a fire at Chernobyl. But outside the U.S., that's not true. And nuclear research is continuing apace using research that was based here that solves those problems. I think that's where the common ground may lie. It is in finding a way to build nuclear plants to address the need for reliable baseload power that doesn't need transmission lines crossing the country. Because we already have coal plants. If you cite nuclear plants where those transmission lines are, the cost of having a a power infrastructure or distribution grid is reduced, a smart grid becomes far cheaper and affordable, and you can build smaller scale, inherently safer nuclear plants that have risks, but the risks are lower than the risks of climate change and coal plants that emit a lot of radiation, mercury and other pollutants. But no one here is probably ready to jump onto that bandwagon, but they have to be receptive to looking at nuclear in a new way if they want to solve the climate change problem and have a dialogue with Republicans and solve mutual demands.
A brief comment on that. Just as there is a politically correct litmus test on the right, that you can't talk about climate right now, yet there are many supporters of carbon tax, there is some political litmus test on the left and the environmental community that you can't talk about nuclear. But we find in our discussions with a lot of environmental leaders that they have changed their opinion on nuclear under the right conditions, that they support nuclear. And James Lovejoy, the scientist from the UK, has been one of the biggest proponents of nuclear. So I think there's probably room for a coalition that may include that, and that many in the environmental community are ready to tread into that territory. Won't be comfortable, but they may need to do it for the greater good. Yes.
First, I guess it's a matter of confession here. I'm still a Republican. Even worse than that, I'm a recovering politician. I served 7 terms in the Connecticut General Assembly.
So, not every Republican runs those tools. What I'd like to maybe suggest here, though, and what the woman in front said is I agree, saying the price on carbon, forget it. I mean, even I come from Connecticut, it's still tax is a nasty word. I would like to suggest we come up with a Palin plan. And what the Palin plan is a cut in income taxes. You talk about payroll taxes, you really mean Social Security taxes. So people don't know what payroll taxes are. But we want to say the first $25,000 of income under the Palin plan will be tax-free to every single American. Now, in order to pay for that, because we have a deficit, we're going to put a tax on something that you can legally avoid. Legally, you can't avoid income tax. You know, you're supposed to, you even sell pot on the streets, you're supposed to declare the income from that. Many times that's how they get people. It's through income tax violations. Gasoline, on the other hand, can be legally avoided. I can buy a more fuel-efficient car, I can take a bus, I can carpool, I can walk, I can move close to work. I can do all these legal things. And what my suggestion would be is you then put in place to implement the Palin plan of a big, huge tax cut for everybody, is to pay for it on the other side so we don't come into a big, huge Obama deficit. We put this escalation up on the gasoline tax. That takes care of a huge part of the climate problem, but not all. The other recommendation, along with this gentleman talking about, is there was a proposal for a renewable portfolio standard, federal RES. Well, we expanded to a CES, a clean energy standard, of which you have sections. You make part of it wind and part of it solar, and yes, part of it nuclear, and if clean coal ever appears, I think it will, but you can throw it in there because it looks good. And you say we want to get our country to 50 or 60% clean energy by 2020. From there, hydro and all these others. And I think that you're starting to change the message like that is really, I'm going to find how we move forward. We haven't even mentioned climate in what I just said under the Palin plan. I mean, so that would be my suggestions how you move forward. And the final thing is, and to sell it, it's local and state champions. So Arnold's going to be unemployed fairly soon. Probably, he's got star power, seems to be worried about the issue. George Pataki was a Republican governor who actually put in place the first cap and trade. It's still, this state's under cap and trade for a power sector. There are a series of folks like this who I think, you can look to and to sell this. And then the last one I shared this with somebody, I think there's this name of 2 people who I think would be ideal. Their name is Bill Gates and Bill Gates. Bill Gates, the head of defense, and Bill Gates, the head of Microsoft, because it brings in, corporate America, I mean, to your point, until the bottom line. So those are my suggestions.
I think those are great suggestions. I'm hoping Dana writes them down. All right, let's see who's next.
Hi, Dan Lashoff with Natural Resources. I'm on the next panel, so I'm not going to get into that debate here. But first of all, I want to thank you, Congressman, for both coming and being able to lead on this, the spirit in which you address this and other issues, and in particular for the comments you made at the Science Committee hearing this week. That's a really great message to your incoming colleague. And I guess my question is, following on to those remarks, and and also for acknowledging just now, even though you didn't support the House Energy and Climate Bill, that the kernel of the idea was actually drawn from a Republican idea, and we can debate later where it may have gone wrong or not, or whether it was fixable. But it seems to me that what happened is. As you were saying about demonizing the president, the opponents to it didn't try to fix what they actually found objectionable in it. They just demonized it. And they demonized it as cap and tax. So given that, I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are, and I know you asked us. I was hoping you were going to come in and tell us what the strategy was. But what are your thoughts about how to reach the Republican members of Congress in a way that will allow them to embrace any approach to addressing this issue? I don't really care whether it's cap and trade, carbon tax, or regulation, or anything. I mean, what can we do to start a conversation where the first thought is not, how can I demonize the approach that is being brought to me, but rather, how can I find a solution that actually works for us?
Well, I think first we need to be patient with the members of Congress that are now having to deal with this scenario where they were propelled along by a great deal of angst in the economy and tissue rejection of the president and some of his ideas. And so having now been pushed along by that, even though some of them really don't want to be pushed by it. I mean, it's not every Republican House member or senator who wants to lead this you lead fearful people toward the cliff they're already running to and actually encourage them to speed up. That's not every House and Senate Republican. There are a good number of them who would like to find a way to get this rhetoric toned down. So, one, be patient with them. Two, build relationships and a support base for them with credible people in the community. And that means, the local business leaders, people, chamber, or wherever, that can come up alongside of them and say, listen, there is support for action out there, and we are not going to come egg your house, or we're not going to, throw pink paint on you or whatever. We're not going to approach Condoleezza Rice with, looking like we're going to scratch her face or whatever. We're not going to do any of that. We're responsible people. That'll help them get to the place of saying, okay, I can see an angle here where I can divert this stampede. I can get it safely over here. And I think this voice of experience back here with a state house member is a great way to go. Is to talk about a shift in taxes, or even a bigger shift in taxes. Give them some big idea to hook on to that isn't just about climate change. And it gets back to your point about then you're selling something besides just climate change. You got a certain number of people going to react to that climate change. That's be great. Happy to have them in the coalition. Now you got to go find some more. And Ronald Reagan said, this is about addition and multiplication, not subtraction and division. That's what politics is about. And so we got to figure out how to do addition and multiplication.
You got a question?
Yeah. I've got a zillion questions, so thank you so much for being here. I guess one thing that folks are saying a lot is that just the spirit in Washington is one of discord, and there's no trust or friendship anymore. Mo Udall and Barry Goldwater used to be able to work together on something, and that can't happen anymore. Is that dead? Will that ever come back? How is that coming about? And how can we from the outside help bring that about?
Yeah, another example is that Ronald Reagan used to have Tip O'Neill over for drinks at the White House. And the two Irishmen got along great and sang and whatever and had a fun time together. Now, during the day, they debate, vigorously, but I think the difference between then and now is that Reagan didn't have to contend with a 24-hour news cycle. I really don't know how to deal with that. I hope you'll tell me how to deal with that, because it is that's a huge. I think that's the biggest difference between the time period you're talking about, or the time period I'm citing, which is Reagan and Tip O'Neill, and now, is that now you have every 30 minutes, stay with us, something terrible's happening. Could be happening to your house. You don't even know it. If you're in South Carolina and you're watching CNN and we're talking about a burning building in Los Angeles, well, I mean, sorry, Marshall, but who cares? I mean, it's in Los Angeles. We're in South Carolina, but the way they play it on the news, you would think it could be my house next. Well, no, it's in Los Angeles. It's unlikely that it's going to come to South Carolina. But just chill out, don't be on such an edge. And so that's our, and then you add to it these folks that are willing to substitute their judgment for people that have been working so hard on climate. That's because they're these talking heads and they don't know anything about climate, but they but I can tell you that I offended the gods, in the midst of one of the things that I really did wrong, apparently, was I said to a crowd of folks, you can see it at anybodybutbob.com if you want to go see the whole exchange. Somebody was taping at a town hall meeting in August of 2009 when a lady told me she was afraid. And I said, what are you afraid of? She said, well, watch Glenn Beck and you'll know. And so I said to her, well, I got a suggestion for you. If he scares you, turn him off. And so the crowd reacted the opposite of the way you're reacting. Oh my goodness. They started getting up and leaving. They were pissed, they booed, they got up and they walked out. It was toward the end of the gathering anyway, but anyway, then it went, if you just Google Inglis and Beck, you'll see it. And it's been seen thousands and thousands of times. And so I don't know, I really don't know how to deal with that, because the reality is, and this is a challenge for every Republican in the room, Glenn Beck is the leader of our party. And that, I don't know how really, this is a problem. And we've got to figure out a way to get around that. And to say, no, well, listen, we understand you're selling books. We understand you're selling soap. We understand you get people all on edge. We understand that's your business model. But we here are trying to do, again, what Jim McDermott said was common good. And that's quite different than selling soap by stirring people up. So,
I'm a Republican, so how many Democrats have gotten to speak today?
I got something you might be able to answer. So we talked about who sets opinion within the Republican Party, and Glenn Beck is one, but someone that I haven't heard today at all is the outside groups like Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works that are essentially, creating nonpartisan 501c3s to funnel millions and millions of dollars of often anonymous money into essentially political work, doing issue education tours in parts of the country that they think are strategic to plant the idea in people's heads that, the ACE's, Waxman-Markey bill is actually a cap and tax socialist death plot. And so you have these third-party actors that are, in my opinion, and from my viewpoint, they're the giants in the room compared to the very sincere attempts to make sort of cross-partisan coalitions for this kind of thing, and they're taking what is essentially a free market solution, cap and trade, and saying it's not a free market solution. And then you have people like Joe Barton saying, I'm for a market solution, but he's not, like, you can't tell me that he's actually going to be for a market solution if it hit him in the face. But Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works are creating space for, you know, to take the pressure on people like Republicans to pump anything. So, sorry, that's less cogent than I wanted to say, but Glenn Beck isn't the only one that sets the tone, the direction of the Republican Party. Heather, both of you actually, I want to hear your thoughts on this too. How do we fight against that message machine and that money that is pouring in that counts as free speech nowadays?
What do you think?
Well, even though I'm chairman of the local losers club, you know, here starting in June, I still am optimistic about the power of ideas and the power of people getting together in good faith. And what looks like a powerful movement or voice, biggest mouth at the moment, they fade. Have you noticed? I mean, they just come and go. And so they're going to go. They're going to move on. You know, the really loud mouths end up moving on. And sometimes you just have to wait them out. And, you know, another way to put it, it's a dangerous way to put it, but one of our 5 children is sitting back there in the back. You know, my wife and I have 5 kids. And so they're not doing this so much anymore, temper tantrums. But, you know, when they were little, when you have a temper tantrum going on, what you do is you just, you sort of, you don't escalate in the middle of it. Because if you do, then you're just making the temper tantrum worse. What you do is you wait until the kid stubs their toe as they're stomping up the stairs. Then there'll be tears, and there'll be a need for a hug, and there's a reconciliation, and there's a teachable moment right there. And so this temper tantrum is going to end in a stub toe. And so what you have to do is just get ready for this moment when there's a teachable moment and there's some tears. Because here's the way I think we got to face it, is that I'd like to see a mirror. I'd like to see everybody do this with their constituents, is get them to hold up a mirror and say, we have met the problem, and the problem is us. When it comes to the deficit, it's Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. That's 60% of what we're spending right now. It's rising to 90% in 2050. And so we have met the problem, and the problem is us. Now, it's also true that when you're looking at that mirror, you've also met the solution. Because if you get together, you can solve those problems. And by the way, one of the best ways to solve those, and I'm coming back to carbon now, in the 1990s, we balanced the budget, you know. We Republicans like to claim credit. We took over in 1994. That's what it was. Bill Clinton would say if he was here, it was my tax increase. He'd call it something different in 1993. The reality is that it was everybody in this room being more productive because of the advent of the internet and the PC that created an expansion in the economy that threw off enormous wealth. It created enormous wealth and threw off enormous revenues to the federal government. That's why we balanced the budget in the late 1990s. So now, if you have this economic plateau that we rose up on with the internet and the PC, energy, I believe very firmly, is the next one. Is so rise up on this plateau and watch wealth be created and watch revenue flow to the federal government. Otherwise, Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid become a real hard problem to solve if you've got a static economic pie, because that means somebody's got to lose. But if you can create a way to grow it, boom, all kinds of things start happening. It's exciting. So
we are essentially out of time. I want to give you a shot because you were just going to say something.
I guess the group Republicans for Environmental Protection has given me a reason to stay a Republican. I became a foot soldier as a Republican for Al Gore by being a member of the Climate Project, trained by him and doing public presentations on climate change. And what I really have to stay away from, try to stay away from, is seeing who can sell the most fear. okay? So you've got Al Gore selling fear of climate change, and you've got the Tea Partiers and the conservative right selling fear. And so if you have both ends trying to sell fear, and who can sell the most fear the best, you're not going to be building a very good and healthy America in the airwaves, and in our houses of Congress and our state houses. So to me, I believe we are what we eat, and I believe we become what we contemplate. And one of the things we haven't yet figured out how to do in this climate movement is present the world as it is going to be when we achieve the sustainable world we are going to achieve.
Yeah.
We haven't painted that picture for people yet. And I think we need to spend a lot of time together painting the picture of what is life going to be like when we achieve sustainability. There are going to be winners and losers in the marketplace. There are going to be coal miners that go out of work. There might be something that has to replace commercial airlines.